On the 1st of June 1974, a huge explosion ripped through the Nypro Chemical works in Flixborough, killing 28 people and wounding 80 others. The blast was heard up to 60 kilometres away, and buildings up to 15 kilometres away were damaged. It was one of the worst industrial accidents that Britain had ever seen, and was the largest peacetime explosion in British history. The Nypro Chemical works were situated just outside the small village of Flixborough, in a rural part of northern England. Originally begun as a Fison's chemical plant making fertiliser, it had been revamped and expanded during the 1960s. The site was vast and produced many raw chemicals to be used in factories around the UK. One of the chemicals it produced was caprolactam, which was used in the manufacture of nylon, a very popular synthetic material widely used during the 1970s. The production of caprolactam involved a process whereby a chemical called cyclohexane was oxidised by injecting compressed air. To do this, the chemicals were run through 6 linked reactors, which were kept under pressure, and it was in this part of the plant that the disaster would occur. During a routine inspection, Reactor 5 was found to be unsafe, as a large crack had appeared in the outer steel sheathing. Production was halted, and Reactor 5 was removed to undergo repairs. It was now that the fatal mistake was made. Instead of halting production and waiting for the number 5 reactor to be repaired, a decision was made to continue production. A simple bypass pipe would be fitted, linking reactors 4 and 6 together. A 20-inch steel pipe with flexible ends called bellows was installed. A nest of scaffolding was erected beneath the pipe to take the weight, and after a quick pressure test, production resumed. At 4:53 in the afternoon of Saturday, June the 1st, this temporary bypass pipe ruptured. It's estimated that between 20 to 40 tonnes of cyclohexane gas was released, forming a dense white cloud. Any workers who witnessed the leak ran for their lives. About 30 seconds after the rupture, the spreading cyclohexane cloud encountered a flame, and the whole mass ignited instantaneously. The resulting explosion completely destroyed the chemical plant and sent out a shock wave which caused damage up to 15 kilometres away. Roofs were ripped off houses, windows were blown in, furniture smashed, people thrown around like rag dolls. Cars in the car park were thrown up into the air and landed as twisted wrecks. Clocks in damaged houses were frozen to the instant of the blast. In Grimsby, a fishing town 60 kilometres away, people heard the sound of the explosion, many saying it sounded like loud thunder. Large parts of heavy metal pipework were found up to 6 kilometres away, and small pieces of debris from the factory were found up to 32 kilometres away. It was Britain's biggest peacetime explosion, and it's estimated to have been the equivalent of the detonation of 280 tonnes of TNT. 28 people in the control room of the plant died instantly, and another 36 workers were injured. Beyond the boundaries of the chemical works there were thankfully no further fatalities, although hundreds of people were injured, mostly from flying glass or from being thrown through the air by the force of the blast. Although tragic, the loss of life was limited as it was the weekend and the plant was running a reduced staff. If the explosion had occurred during the week, there would have been around 500 people on site, and the death toll would have undoubtedly been many times higher. The emergency services arrived quickly, but faced with a scene of almost total devastation inside the plant, their efforts were in vain. Unable to quench the flames, the fires burned for 10 days, belching huge clouds of black, noxious smoke into the air. People in the immediate area were evacuated to temporary shelters, and the injured were ferried to hospitals in the nearest towns. An immediate inquiry was set up, but ultimately was unable to pinpoint the actual cause of the blast. There was eyewitness testimony to the fact that the bypass pipe had failed, so how the explosion occurred was not in doubt, but no conclusion could be reached as to exactly why. The most plausible theory was that the bends within the bypass pipe caused repeated flexing under pressure, which eventually led to the rupture due to metal fatigue. However, engineers were not able to replicate this failure, so to this day, uncertainty remains. Despite opposition from members of the public who lived in the local area, The plant was subsequently rebuilt and resumed production. However, as time passed, the demand for nylon began to decline, and the plant became no longer cost-effective to operate. It closed down in 1981 and was eventually demolished. An industrial estate now occupies the land. In the gardens of the small church in Flixborough, there is a memorial plaque to those who died. It's never easy to say that there's anything lucky about a disaster like this, but there can be no doubt that had the accident occurred during the working week, the death toll would have been much, much worse. So for that, I suppose one has to be thankful in some way. On a side note, the Flixborough disaster was also the instance of one of Britain's best-known cases of premonition. The story goes like this. On the morning of the disaster, Mrs. Leslie Brennan was at home in Cleethorpes watching the television. She remembered that the movie was interrupted by a news flash announcing that an explosion had ripped through the Flixborough Nypro plant and that several people had died. She distinctly remembers the words news flash appearing on the television screen and a man's voice relaying the information. About noon, two friends paid her a visit, and she asked them if they'd heard about the accident, which of course they hadn't. When later on they were listening to the news about the explosion, the three women thought at first that the newsreaders were stating the details incorrectly, but a check of the paper the next day showed the actual time of the explosion. Whatever strange thing had happened, the three friends maintained that she told them of the accident almost 5 hours before it actually happened. Although impossible to prove, her story was widely reported at the time due to the corroboration of the two friends. Brennan herself could offer no explanation to the strange event. It seems unlikely she made it up. She just didn't seem the kind of person that was seeking attention, and to this day, the strange event remains a mystery.